Okay, so next up, our next speaker says that thanks to this country's gas reserves, everyone wants to hug Israel. Now, having spent some time in his office just the other week interviewing him, I think I'd like to give him a hug as well. But if you can just give him a round of applause for Energy Minister, Mr. Silvan Shalom.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Rosner, Dr. Wald. I'm very happy to be here today because I think we are sharing one thing in common in the entire world. We would like to have alternative fuels. We would like to become more free, and we are asking for that freedom because, unfortunately, the fact that the oil is located in one area was used by many countries against the whole international community. It reminds me that when I was foreign minister, I had the opportunity to meet with one of the world leaders. And then we were trying to move the Iranian file from the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, to the Security Council, because the Security Council is the only body that can impose sanctions on Iran. And I was asked by that world leader, he asked me, listen, what do you mean by that? Do you mean that it will bring economic sanctions? If it won't be effective. But if we impose economic sanctions, the price of a barrel will jump to $100 per barrel, when then it was only $40. I told him, listen, my friend, when I'm talking to you about the living, you are talking to me about the standard of living. First, let's make sure that we'll keep the living, and then we'll find ways how to improve the standard of living. And I think it shows everything that is connected with oil, because it's all about politics. Even these days, while the Security Council or the P5+1 are trying to negotiate with Iran, it's located there, and it's based only, as I see it, about economy. Russia and China are backing Iran not because they like Iran to hold the nuclear power. Because Russia itself is threatened by a nuclear missile that can approach its southern part of their country. So why they are backing Iran? They are backing Iran because they are very much afraid the tougher sanctions on Iran will bring the regime down, and then the Syrian regime will fall, the Hezbollah in Lebanon will disappear, and then the whole Middle East will fall to the hands of the United States and the Western countries. And the Middle East, it means, first and foremost, the all oil reserves of the entire world for the next 150 years that are located here in the Middle East. When I'm saying here, unfortunately, it's not here in Israel. We were blessed in the Bible that we are a country of milk and honey, but still, we are having a very, very new and big development after the discovery of the gas here in our region. Gas, of course, can replace the oil. Gas is cleaner, is cheaper, and of course it will enable us to use it for local purposes as well as to export our gas worldwide. These days, the last discovery that we have here in Israel is the biggest, let's say, worldwide in the last 10 or 20 years. And we are very happy for that. And we would like to develop it, and we would like to try to switch some of our industry, some of our transportation to gas. These days, while we are using gas not in a full capacity, it saves us about 250 million euros a month. It saves us about 3 billion euros a year, but in 2015 it will be much, much higher. It will be about $8 to $9 billion a year. And while we are saving $9 billion a year in our energy expenses, it means that we can cut the tariff of electricity. Then we can cut the tariff of water, because the salination that we are very advanced with, and even trying to pump water, all of that is based on electricity. And then when we will cut the energy expenses, the electricity expenses, the water expenses, it will enable the whole Israeli industry to produce their products in much cheaper cost. It will enable them to compete overseas if they will export it, and if they will sell it here in the local market, it means that the cost of living of the Israeli people will go down and down every year after another. And that can show you what does it mean to have alternative fuels. And gas, of course, is the main source that we are based on these days, but it's not only gas. We are looking for other sources. But gas is the main one in industry, and we would like to use it in transportation as well. I was in Italy about 1 or 2 months ago, and we are going to have a delegation from Fiat, because in Italy to use gas in their buses and in their trucks is very, very common, and we would like to adapt their experience and their knowledge, and we would like to believe that we are going to do it. For that, we have published 2 standards, of course, that will enable the transportation industry to move toward using gas. Of course, the oil stations that will be able to supply gas to those cars, trucks, or buses if they are needed. And it means that we are going to cut the cost of transportation in Israel in a very sharp way. That shows us once again what you can do if you have alternative fuel. But we are looking for, of course, for renewable energy. We are having sun 365 days a year. It's something that we should use, and it's based on all the options: thermosolar, PV, biomassa, wind. Every one of the options is open, but as I see it, we are more focusing on PV, photovoltaic, these days, and we took a decision, a resolution in our cabinet, that until the year 2020, we will use 10% of our energy from renewable energies. So it gives the industry the long-term future, or to look long-term way in order to develop the industry, and of course to invest, by knowing that we are committed to the idea to use 10% of our energy that will be used by renewable energy. Of course, it's not so easy, not because it's easy, it's difficult to use it, but still, it's more expensive than the conventional energy, and the conventional one is much cheaper. And when we use, let's say, alternative fuels like renewable energy, it will cost more. And when it will cost more, of course, it will affect the tariff of electricity, and it might, make it more expensive for the entire Israeli economy. So we have to find a balance. On one end, to try to encourage the renewable industry. On the other end, to know that we have to cut some of the benefits that were given from day one in order to make it more balanced, still to encourage that renewable energy because it's very important for us, but by knowing that every year after another, the protection that they need should be lower and lower one. And that will, of course, enable us even to extend or expand the using of renewable energy if it won't affect the tariff so sharply by making it much more higher tariff or much more expensive. We, in our ministry, would like to find out if we can use methanol as well, and it can be used from natural gas. That's why it's available, and it can be used in a short time, and by all means that we have, we can help those who would like to use methanol to try to do it. We are sharing an experience these days in order to make it possible for those who are considering to use it to know that it's safe, that it will be cheap, that it will be something that will be available for them, and if the experience will come with a positive outcome, with a positive results, it might encourage, I believe, many to try to move from oil toward methanol. We are looking for the GTL as well, gas to liquids, and it's something that might replace, mazout, oil, kerosene. Let's say the characters are very close, but for us it will be much, much better because we can save much more if we will use GTL. We invest in R&D a huge amount of money and efforts in order to bring it to reality. And I think that after we are having the gas discovery, after we have decided to encourage many companies and factories to use it, after we are helping the renewable energy industry to become stronger and stronger, and to know that they are having that commitment of Israel, of the government, to have 10% of our full energy that will be used by that, by taking, it for transportation, the gas, the CNG, the GTL, the methanol, all of that together shows that we are having some alternatives. We would like to develop them, and I believe that if we will focus on those options, if we will realize that the time has come for the whole international community to look for alternative for oil, I believe that the outcome in the future will be very positive. Thank you very much indeed.
Mr. Shalom, Mr. Minister, before you run off, we've got time for a couple of questions, if that's okay. I know that Terry here had one he wanted to ask you. So, Terry.
Minister Shalom, thank you so much for those comments, and I think Israel is doing a great job in demonstrating what's possible, especially for a small country. But I do want to sort of challenge, if I may, one assumption that I've heard throughout this conference so far and in your remarks, that we really ought to be working to bring down the cost of transportation fuels, when in fact there are a lot of hidden externalities, whether it's climate change, whether it's health care, from pollution, whether it's defending oil and other kinds of fossil fuels. And I just wonder if, of course, it's politically expedient for political leaders to talk about trying to bring down these costs, but is that really in our countries, whether it's mine or yours, best interest to do that?
First, the fact that most of the public buses will be switched to gas, it means that if the cost of transportation will be much lower, it will encourage most of the Israelis to use the buses than to use their own private cars. So it goes together. I don't see it in a contrary ones against each other. I believe it goes together. It goes end by end, and by trying to bring all the Israeli buses to use gas, that will make it much cheaper for the passengers and for the consumers. I believe that it goes with all the other effects that you have just mentioned.
Would, Mr. Minister, just following on from that, would not lower costs of public transport and of personal transport in the form of cars, if everyone's getting CNG, compressed natural gas, much cheaper than fuel right now, that will...
And more cleaner, and much cleaner, of course.
Much cleaner, but won't that encourage people to use their cars more and go against efforts, for example, of the mayor of Tel Aviv, we were hearing from yesterday, to get people off of cars, reduce congestion, and get them onto bikes or public transport?
Even if they will use it, first we would like all of them to move to gas. But even if they will use gas, if they will use gas in their personal cars, the gas is much cleaner. And even for health it will be much better. For air pollution it will be much better. The question is, of course, about the alternatives. Economy is based on alternatives. I don't see that right now most of the cars will move toward gas. It's of course based on the car industry as a whole, and not about the decision of every Israeli individual. But more than that, I believe that we should start with buses, we should start with trucks that will move anyway, because it's they use it for their, on a daily basis for work. So if they will do so, I believe that finally, you know, it goes all together, because if it will be much cheaper, it will give the Israelis, you know, more net income. It will help the Israeli growth. It will help the Israeli growth. We will have more tax income. We'll have more tax income. We can develop the country. We can bring more to health. We can bring to many other issues. So I see it in a very positive way, and I don't see any reason why to oppose it. It doesn't look. It doesn't make sense to me. Let's say I would like to keep it gentle, in a gentle way.
Let me pick up on one other thing you said, Mr. Minister, about having 365 days a year of sun and having set a 10% renewable portfolio standard for your country. 32 of the 50 U.S. states now have renewable portfolio standards that are more than that. California's is already at 20%, on the way to a third. And in fact, the power from the sun or the wind or moving tides is free. So it's a matter of taking the technology, of course, and converting that into something useful. But after that, you don't spend anything for energy. The International Energy Association today released a report that's in Haaretz this morning, talking about how the gas bubble is exactly that. It's got 10, 20 years, and then there's not going to be enough because we're all going to be using it in our buses and our trucks and so forth. So wouldn't it be smarter to be coming up with a greater strategy and a greater emphasis on more renewables in your grid and then more electrification?
I think that the main goal of that conference should be that we should not rely on one source only. And we have to try to develop all the options. And with renewable energy these days in Israel is much more expensive than the conventional one. And if we would like to keep it alive, if we would like to encourage it, we should give them some benefits, but it should be known that for the future we should cut it because it affects the tariff, and when the tariff of electricity is much higher because of the renewable energy, it affects the whole Israeli economy. Of course, the cost of living is much higher. The cost of energies for all of those industries is much higher. The prices of the products that they are trying to sell here for the local market or overseas is much higher. So it affects the Israeli economy in a very sharp way. The main goal should be to cut the cost of energy and to cut the cost of energy by all means. In the same time, even it's still much more expensive than gas or than the conventional one, we would like to encourage renewable energy by knowing that, as you have mentioned, that 1 year after another it will become much cheaper, and then, of course, it will encourage us to use more and more. Now 10%, and of course the sky is the limit.
Minister, just one final question.
I'm sorry, I have to leave because
Okay.
I have a shift in the Knesset. You know, every minister should stay there for all day while the members of parliament are giving their speeches, and today is my turn.
Okay.
So I'm sorry that I have to leave in order to be there at
great job.
11.
We thank Minister Silvan Shalom, Israel's
Thank you.
Minister. Thank you.